Toiviainen from Finland. So I leave it to Anna Kolesnikov to introduce our speaker and the topic he will address in the following talk. So welcome again.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Hello, everyone. Yes, welcome, and thank you for joining us in the third session of the spring edition of the Neuroscience and Humanities Lab webinar series, Embodied Music Experience, a Biocultural Approach. We are very pleased to present our third speaker of the series, Professor Toiviainen. I'm very sorry if I've probably pronounced that incorrectly.
It's okay.
Professor Toiviainen received a Master in Science in Theoretical Physics and a PhD in Musicology, both at the University of Jyväskylä in Finland. Since 2002, he is Professor of Music at the University of Jyväskylä. He has been visiting professor at Cornell University and visiting fellow at the Center for Advanced Study in the Behavioral Sciences at Stanford University. During 2008 to 2013, he was the head of the Finnish Center of Excellence in Interdisciplinary Music Research at the Universities of Jyväskylä and Helsinki. In 2014 to 2018, he held an academy professorship granted by the Academy of Finland. And starting from 2022, leading up to 2029, he will be the Finnish Center of Excellence in Music, Mind, Body, and Brain Director. His research interests include music and movement, music processing in the brain, sound and music computing, and music visualization. And so, Professor Toiviainen, please go ahead, and thanks very much.
Thank you, Anna, for this introduction, and thank you very much for this invitation to talk at this event. I'm delighted to share with you some of our research findings. So let me just share my screen. Let's have a sound check again. Can you hear music?
Yes, that's perfect.
Yes, yes.
All right, great. Then we can start. So in our lab, we have studied music and movement for about 20 years using motion capture technology. And one of our main topics has been music-induced movement, or spontaneous dance, if you wish. And we've been interested in both common patterns and individual differences in this phenomenon. And so today I'd like to share with you what we have learned about this topic along these years. So let's start with a couple of examples that might suggest that movement and music are closely intertwined. So let's go first to our motion capture lab and play some bass drum for an infant. Next, let's play some jazz to my granddaughter. Okay, so there seems to be a strong connection between rhythm, music, and movement already at a young age. And indeed, there's a fairly large body of research that points to the close connection between music perception and movement. And let me just highlight a couple of these studies. So what has been found is that on one hand, hearing music induces movement and affects movement. For instance, it has been found by Marcel Zentner and Tuomas Eerola that music induces rhythmic movement in infants more efficiently than speech. Also, it has been found that people tend to walk faster when they listen to music than, for instance, when they listen to a metronome. And this effect works to the other direction as well. So movement can affect the way we hear music. For instance, it's been found that moving to the beat enhances the accuracy to which we perceive beat. And also in a series of studies by Jessica Phillips-Silver and Laura Traynor, they have found that the way we move to beat can affect the way we perceive musical meter. And so this reciprocal influence between movement and perception is often taken as a support for a causal role that movement plays in music perception. In addition to behavioral findings, there are also neural findings that point to the importance of the motor areas in the brain in beat perception. For instance, Jessica Grahn and many others have found that music listening activates motor areas, in particular when the music or rhythm has a regular beat. I'm sure Jessica will talk more about this in 2 weeks in her talk. In addition to brain activity, also functional connectivity seems to be playing a role here between auditory and motor areas. For instance, in a fairly recent study of ours, we used the dynamic functional connectivity analysis, and we found that when listening to a piece of real music, the salience of the beat or the clarity of the beat affects functional connectivity between auditory and motor areas. In particular, we found 2 different functional networks for beat inference and beat maintenance. Now, in a broader framework, there are some theoretical accounts that may give explanations for the importance of movement in music processing. First, the embodied view of cognition states that all aspects of cognition are shaped by aspects of the body. In other words, our sensory motor capacities, body, and environment play a role in cognitive processing. So according to this view, perception is not mere passive retrieval, but active construction based upon an organism's embodied, goal-directed actions. The common coding theory, on the other hand, states that the perceptual and motor representations are linked, and support to this comes, for instance, from infants' innate imitation capabilities. So infants can mimic facial expressions. More specifically, embodied music cognition that has been promoted above others by Mark Lehman and his colleagues assumes that our acquired associations between motor output and the consequent sensory musical input creates an integrated network that underlies both music production and music perception. Okay, now let's go to motion capture lab and ask our participants to move freely to music, and let's see what happens. Okay, so you probably saw great individual differences, but maybe also some commonalities in these patterns. So let me first try to summarize the empirical framework that we have used in our studies. So our focus is in music-induced movement. So how can that be characterized? Well, the first way is to use kinematic analysis using motion capture data that we have collected to extract kinematic features ranging from fairly simple features such as velocities and accelerations of different body parts towards more higher level features like smoothness of movement or complexity or dimensionality of movement. Another way of characterizing this movement is to use perceptual tests, and so by presenting point light displays to participants and ask them to rate certain characteristics of the movement that they see. Two main kind of phenomena in this music-induced movement that we have been interested in are, first of all, synchronization. So the movements usually tend to be synchronized to the temporal structure or the beat of the music, and then gestures is more like a not temporally locked way of looking at the movement characteristics. So looking at these characteristics of music-induced movement, then fairly we are interested in various aspects that affect these characteristics. And so the first one is external or exogenous aspects, of which, of course, the most important thing is the music, which is the driving force. And now how can we characterize the music that our participants are hearing? Well, first way that we use is content analysis, musical content analysis. So starting from the musical audio, we analyze relevant musical features using methods of music information retrieval, and we use the music information retrieval toolbox that we have developed for that purpose to extract features related to the rhythmic structure, the timbre, the tonality, and the dynamics of music. Another way to characterize music is to use semantic labels that can be retrieved, for instance, from music distribution platforms related to, for instance, musical genre or mood and so on. And then finally, of course, we can carry out perceptual tests on the music, for instance, to get ratings of musical emotion in the stimuli. Another exogenous factor that we have been interested in is the context. Of course, there can be different kind of contextual factors, but the one that we have been mainly interested in is the presence or absence of a dancing partner, and whether and how this affects the musical movements. On the other side, then are the endogenous factors. Again, there can be plenty of them, like age, gender, height, weight, musical taste, and so on, certainly affect the movement. The two endogenous factors that we have been focusing mainly are personality traits and mood states. So then these exogenous factors are more about commonalities between individuals, whereas endogenous factors are more about individual differences. Also, interactions between these can be, and we have studied, for instance, effect of context and personality together on these movements. Given that these movements are quite complicated, we constantly develop new methods to deal with this complexity of these movements, and that's one fairly important line of our research, which I'm not so much touching in this talk, so I'm more focusing on the results that we have found. So let's start with musical content and how it affects the kinematics of music-induced movement. So we, first of all, have been interested in synchronization of movements to music. Now, the temporal structure of music is often hierarchical, so there are several interleaved periodicities with integer multiple relationships. For instance, in the 4/4 meter, we have this kind of hierarchy of beat importance, which also can be seen as having like several simultaneous beats in the music. So there would be a 1-beat level like the tactus level, and then a slower beat with a 2-beat period, and even slower beat with 4-beat period. And now we were interested in whether and how we embody this musical meter. So can we find like movement patterns that are related to these different metrical levels? And how do these embodiments depend on the content of the music? To this end, we used various methods to decompose these complex multidimensional movements into their basic components, which we refer to as eigenmovements. And just to summarize this, we found a fairly constant common pattern. So let's have a look at these 6 guys here dancing to a piece of music in 4/4 meter. And so we can decompose it into, first of all, this basic beat 2 Hertz period, which mostly comprises vertical movement of the body. The 2-beat period, on the other hand, often contains a swing of limbs. And finally, the 4-beat period is often associated with sideways swaying of the body. And this seems to be a fairly consistent pattern across individuals. So we seem to kind of pass the metrical structure of the movement of the music with these kind of movement patterns. We also looked at the musical structure and whether and to what extent these eigenmovements depend on the musical structure. And it seems that the amplitude of these eigenmovements depends on the fluctuation of the music at mostly at 1 and 2 beat levels. So in a way, it seems that our body resonates with the hierarchical fluctuation pattern in music. In the next study, with Birgitta Burger as the first author, we were interested in how the synchronization of different body parts depends on the tempo of the music and the low frequency flux. So the low frequency flux is associated with, for instance, the bass drum and the bass in popular music. And there has been some studies suggesting that this is a fairly important driving force in music-induced movement. We had 18 stimuli, music stimuli with varying tempo and spectral flux. Let me just play a couple of examples. So that was a low frequency flux example, and this next one is a high low frequency flux example. I'm gonna wait till the midnight hour. That's when my love. Okay, so one main effect that we found was something that is consistent with what has been found in tapping studies earlier. So the synchronization accuracy in the movement was highest in the preferred tempo, and when the tempo was lower or higher, then the synchronization accuracy decreased. So we had an inverted U shape for the synchronization accuracy. Then we observed an interesting interaction where for the beat level synchronization, the participants synchronized better when the low frequency flux was strong. Whereas for the bar level synchronization, we had an opposite pattern, and that's something that we can't really explain, but the pattern is there quite clear. Okay, next study by Josh's master's thesis that was finally published recently. So we were interested in interpersonal synchrony and whether interpersonal synchrony in dance affects social bonding. Now, to manipulate the interpersonal synchrony, we used a silent disco paradigm where our dancing dyads had wireless headphones to which we played music that was either synchrony, so identical for the two members of the dyad, or tempo shifted or phase shifted. And first of all, as was expected, the best kinematic synchrony was in the sync condition. So the participants were kinematically synchronized when they heard the same music, almost as well with phase shift, but worst in tempo condition. We also looked to what extent the dyads looked at each other, and it seemed that in the sync condition, they were facing more to each other than in the other conditions. And finally, we asked them how they felt the interaction after each stimulus presentation, and they rated the interaction higher in sync condition than in phase shifted condition. So it seems that the interpersonal synchrony in dance affects social bonding to some extent. Okay, and our previous studies were about synchronization. So in the next studies are about gestural characteristics, so non-time locked characteristics. And in this study, we were interested in how the gestural characteristics of dance movement depend on rhythm and timbre-related musical features. Again, we had a bunch of participants dancing to 30 stimuli in this case, representing different genres of music. And we performed kinematic feature extraction from the mocap data and musical feature extraction from the musical stimuli and performed correlational analysis. And what we found was, for instance, when the pulse of the music was clear, we observed more overall movement of the dancers. Low frequency flux, so bass, drum, and bass, increased mostly head movement in this study. Whereas then high frequency flux, which is then associated with cymbals and percussion, as well as percussiveness index, when they were high, the participants tended to move their upper body more than otherwise. So there seems to be this kind of associations between the musical content and the musical the movement kinematics. Okay, now emotions are an important element of musical expression, and music-induced movement may be shaped by the emotional content of music. So in this study, we were interested in whether perceived emotions of music are somehow embodied in dance movements. To this end, we, in addition to a motion capture study, we performed an emotion rating study with the music stimuli, where the participants were asked to rate the emotional content of the music. And we here propose a method called circular effect that basically allows us to project our movement kinematic variables onto this two-dimensional emotion space, so the valence arousal space. And so if we highlight here a few things, for instance, music with high arousal tended to evoke high acceleration in head and hands. And then, of course, vice versa, low arousal, this acceleration was lower. Happy music was associated with rotation, more rotation than sad music. On the other hand, sad music was associated with high foot distance in the dance movement. And finally, low arousal, so basically sad and tender music mostly was associated with a forward-leaning posture, whereas then high arousal was associated with a more backward-leaning posture. And low arousal was associated with smooth movement. So there seems to be quite clear associations between the music, emotional content of music and kinematic features evoked by the music. Related to emotions, another interesting question is whether we can perceive visually the emotional content of music from point light displays of dance movements. So in this study, then we performed a perfect perceptual test where we asked our participants to rate the emotional content of stick figure animations created from participants dancing to music with varying emotional content. And so we had like, okay, these four graphs here basically represent the target emotions, so happy stimulus, angry stimulus, sad stimulus, and tender stimulus. And then in each graph, the four bars then show the emotional ratings of the movement. And for the most, the target emotion was rated as the highest in the perceptual test, suggesting that the emotional content can be reliably perceived from point light displays, with the exception of tenderness, which is the rightmost graph, for which participants tended to rate them to be more sad than more tender. So there's a confusion here between sadness and tenderness. So there's a bias towards sadness in the perception of movement. Okay, now there are certain conventions regarding how we dance to music representing different genres. For instance, heavy metal is often associated with headbanging, while Latin music may evoke maybe smoother dance movements and so on. And this kind of stereotypical movement patterns likely reflect not only audio features of the music, but some kind of cultural norms associated with specific genres. So in this study, we were interested in whether it's possible to identify musical genre from motion capture. And we used a machine learning approach here. So basically our main question was how genre-specific are spontaneous dance movements. And we had a bunch of participants who were dancing to 16 musical stimuli representing 8 different genres. So we had 2 stimuli per genre. And we performed kinematic covariance analysis, which kind of could be thought of as a kinematic counterpart of functional connectivity. So it's basically about how, to what extent different body parts are moving in tandem in the movement. And then we used machine learning in more specifically a support vector machine in 2 tasks. The first one was we trained a model to classify the genre in the movements, and then in the second model we trained to classify the participant. Now the results were not quite what we expected actually. So the genre classification accuracy was fairly low. It was it's shown with the black bars in the graph. So it was 23%, where the chance level was 12.5. So it was above chance, but not very accurate. Whereas for participant classification, we obtained a very high accuracy, which is 94%, where the chance level was 1.4% because we had so many participants. So basically, this suggests that people tend to stick with their own dance moves, regardless of the genre they are dancing to put it simply. But then what was interesting is that the genre classification accuracy varied across genres, as you can see in the black bars. So the highest accuracy was for metal and jazz, country. And so basically it suggests that these genres elicit more like genre-typical dance movements. Whereas, for instance, pop, which received the lowest accuracy, then maybe is more a generic dance style where people then can express their own dance movements and dance style. Okay, now moving on to traits and states and individual differences and how they might affect the way we dance to music, the way we express the music with our body movements. Now, so in this study by Jeff Luck, as the first author, we were basically interested in how personality traits manifest in kinematics of music-induced movement. We started with running an online study using the Big 5 personality inventory, which basically measures the 5 basic personality traits: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism, with almost 1,000 participants, from which we then selected like extreme scorers for each of the 5 dimensions for a subsequent motion capture study. And again, we extracted kinematic features from the movement and correlated them with their personality ratings. And overall, each personality dimension was associated with a different pattern of movement characteristics. So it suggests that the personality can be somehow seen in the way we move to music. The most clear relationships we found in extroversion and neuroticism. And let me just give you examples of both. So first, extroversion. So now you can guess. So high extroverts have the highest levels of head speed, movement of limbs, and global movement. As regards neuroticism, so the participant on the left had a higher neuroticism rating. Participants with high levels of neuroticism showed jerky and accelerated local movements and little global movements, so they didn't move across the dance floor so much. And also, we compared these different musical stimuli, and this effect of personality was strongest with Latin techno and rock music. Okay, another interesting question is like whether the personality affects the way we respond to music and changes in music. And we were mostly interested in this study on tempo, how strongly we respond to tempo changes in music and how that depends on our personality traits. So in this study, we used the 10-item personality inventory and the interpersonal reactivity index as the personality measures. Had some Motown music with different original tempo, used some time stretching of the music as well, and focused on the acceleration of body parts in the kinematic analysis. And what we found was that conscientiousness and extroversion showed the strongest effects in responsiveness to tempo changes. In particular, high consciousness and low extroversion both are correlated with greater responsiveness to tempo change. Okay, moving from traits to states and move states. So we're also interested in whether our mood affects the characteristics of dance movement. So to this end, we use the positive affect, negative affect schedule to measure the participants' mood before the motion capture experiment, and did kinematic postural feature analysis and compared these features with their mood ratings. And two of these guys are in positive mood. The other two less so. So basically, what we found was that positive affect had an effect. So participants with high positive mood displayed high hand and head velocity, a spread out posture of the hands, and more complex and more variable dance movements. So again, mood seems to be visible from the kinematics of movement. Okay, let's move now to the interaction and dancing with a partner, how that affects our movements, and also how this might be modulated by our personality traits. In this study by Martin Hartmann as the first author, we compared perception of interaction from movement with kinematics of movement. So basically, can we find kinematic features that predict how we perceive interaction and similarity in dancing dyads? And again, we used point light displays in a perceptual test where we asked our participants to rate the interaction and similarity of dance movements of the dyads. And we used a method called latent space kinematic modeling, in particular partial least squares correlation analysis, to obtain measures of temporal and spatial coupling of movement. So temporal coupling means just how synchronized the two dancers' movements overall are, and spatial coupling is basically quantifies how similar the movements are with each other. What we found was that simply the dorsal orientation was best predictor of perceived interaction. So basically, participants rated the dyads to interact more when they were facing each other, which kind of makes sense. For similarity, on the other hand, we found that our measures of temporal coupling and spatial coupling, so these latent space methods, could predict best the perceived similarity. Okay. Now, this study was about individual differences in movement interaction, where we were interested in how personality affects the way we respond to our dance partners' movements. And so we had dyads dancing again, both alone and, dancers dancing both alone and in dyads. We collected Big Five and empathy quotient data from our participants and used social relation model on kinematic variables. So social relation model aims to separate causality of a given behavior as it takes place in a dyad into actor effects, partner effects, and relationship effects. And what we found was that participants with high empathy showed greater differences in the amount of movement in responses to different partners. So they kind of adjusted more to their partners' movements. And also for female participants, we found that females with high agreeableness, there was a partner effect in head movement, and head movement is considered to be fairly important factor in movement interaction overall. Now, the previous study was about kinematics of interaction. We also were interested in perception of interaction and how this might be modulated by personality traits. So we were interested in how individuals' tendency to empathize affect their dance interaction as perceived by others. So again, we carried out a perceptual test with point light displays. We had three kinds of combinations of dyads. So we had like two dancers, both with high empathy, then a high-low empathy combination, and then dyads with low and low empathy. And our participants in the perceptual test were asked to rate their interaction and similarity. And again, we found significant effects of empathy combination, and quite interestingly and maybe somewhat unexpectedly, the high-low dyads were perceived to be more interactive than others, more interactive than the high-high and low-low empathy combinations. And as regards perceived similarity, the high-high dyads were, well, it was the same kind of pattern, but the high-high dyads were observed to be less similar than others. So this kind of suggests that the perceived interaction and similarity to some extent was more apparent when one dyad member was primarily adjusting their movements to the other. Also, we found some fairly significant correlations between kinematic variables and the perceived variables. So, for instance, interaction was associated with high period locking, so synchrony, high hand movement, and orientation towards the other, whereas similarity was predicted mostly just by the period locking or synchrony between the dancers. Okay, so to wrap it up, so we think that spontaneous music-induced movement provides naturalistic method to study synchronization, gestural expression, and interaction. We have found that music-induced movement is more often than not, synchronized to several metrical levels of music simultaneously. Characteristics of music-induced movement are shaped by musical content and context, which is the presence of dance partner. It's also shaped by personality traits and mood states. Now, what we are working on at the moment is to develop new methods that would allow us to understand better the movement and quantify relevant features from the movement. There are certain challenges. It is this kind of analysis. First of all, I mean, the movement itself is multidimensional. There are many body parts moving in many dimensions, more or less independently from each other. The movement is non-stationary, so people tend to change their dancing patterns on the fly. That's because of the task. They are asked to move as they wish in their own style. And then when it comes to multi-person interaction, that provides yet an additional degree of difficulty, complex interactions in multidimensional space. And so we have been working on some analytical solutions on that. For instance, using latent space methods, which I already mentioned earlier, principal components analysis, canonical components analysis, partial least squares, and so on. And recently also we have developed new time frequency methods using wavelet transforms to quantify this kind of complex interaction. There's a recent paper by Martin Hartmann and myself where we propose a new method called generalized cross-wavelet transform that is aimed to provide measures of multidimensional movement interaction between dancers. So I would like to thank my great colleagues, Birgitta, Jeff, Suvi, Emily, Martin, Mark, Anastasios, Pasi, and Josh for the collaboration, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Toiviainen.
Thank you very much.
I just wanted to say quickly that if any, now we have time for questions, and anyone who would like to ask a question, please raise your virtual hand and I'll activate your microphone and video. So I don't know, I just saw a lot of hands and now they just all went away. But yeah, Vittorio, did you want to?
Yes, well, first of all, thank you so much. An impressive work, tapping on many very interesting and exciting aspects of the relationship between music, body, and movement. I have a first question which deals with the relationship between practicing dance and the correlated perceptual ability in discriminating, identifying all the parameters you have been dealing with in your exciting experiments. So am I becoming any better in evaluating, according to a variety of parameters, the dance I'm perceiving, whether I engage before in, or if there is a T0 and T1 study that measure this motor bodily training in perceptual abilities? Thank you.
Well, yeah, that's a very interesting question. We haven't studied this, but well, I would assume that that we get more perceptive because of say the perception action coupling. We also, our perception of dance movements gets more accurate, but yeah, we haven't really had that as a factor in our studies. So I think our participants have been mostly like non-trained dancers.
Okay. I would like to ask a question. So thank you, Professor Toiviainen, again. And my question would be, so about whether ecological validity might be a factor in your motion capture studies, and if so, to what extent?
Well, yes, I think there are many aspects in ecological validity, and when you think of ecological validity with its strictest definition, then certainly doing measurements in a motion capture lab is not ecologically valid. So I guess the ecologically valid aspect that we have here is to use real musical stimuli, not anything like a synthesized stimuli that are synthesized from parameters, and then we analyze the stimuli. But yeah, certainly to strive for more ecological validity would be important. And of course, there have been studies where, for instance, in a real, like say, a discotheque environment, where participants have been motion captured, for instance, using a head marker only, and that's also, of course, more ecologically valid. The problem is then if you're interested in the whole body movements and want to analyze them, then it gets complicated outside of the lab. So it's a trade-off here, but certainly the optimal thing would be to have a motion capture laboratory in a discotheque.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, Vittorio.
Yes. I was thinking about the relationship between bodily movement during dance, emotion perceived, and the possibility to refer these emotions to different body parts. This is another kind of Finnish line of research. I'm referring to Dr. Numenman. And I recently found a paper where they measured the congruence comparing two different cultures. I think Western people from the Western part of the world, and Chinese people, while listening to Chinese music and Western music. I guess it was pop music. And what they found that there is a congruence in localizing in different body parts some emotions. So I think my gut feeling, I'm thinking aloud, is that this is only, I mean, it's an open question. Is this a late crystallization of a more pristine way to combine emotion with music, which is embodying into dance? So do you think it's possible that this relationship that you are studying between particular way of moving particular parts of the body in relation with particular emotion conveyed by music can somehow crystallize in different body location that you think about when you're asked to localize in your body? So is there a proof of a potential congruence between movement and body part in this bodily evaluation? Sorry for being long and unclear, but I hope you got the gist of my answer. Thank you.
Yes, again, I mean, that's a very interesting point. I guess maybe it would be worth to try to do some kind of comparison between what Lauri Numenmaa has found and maybe if there are some kinematic similarities with their results and see then if certain body parts could be associated with emotions both on a kind of experiential level and kinematic level. So that's, yeah, maybe something worth looking at.
Thank you. And then if our participants are still that shy, I would invite them to take the opportunity to ask questions because, I mean, this is incredibly leading edge work. I would like to ask you something about the autonomic correlates of what's going on at the level of the movement. The student of ours who recently, it's an undergraduate student, he was interested in looking into dyadic movement synchrony within a simple tapping task, and heart synchrony comparing romantic couples and strangers. And apparently romantic couples seem to better synchronize with their heart when they synchronize with their behavior. So I was wondering whether this autonomic, now it's very popular, everybody speaks of interoception, and so the inside is as appealing as the outside. So I was wondering if you ever looked into that.
No, we haven't really looked into it, but yes, it's interesting, and we have discussed also actually we are planning to do in 2 weeks. We are doing an experiment with choir singers where we will collect heart rate data while they will perform different kind of singing tasks. That's nothing to do with romantic couples, but still it's about synchronization of other bodily functions other than movement, and so. But we are just starting this kind of research line. So I think your mic is muted.
Oh, sorry. I said very interesting. We are looking forward to the results.
Okay, thank you.
I think we have a question from Felix. And so I will activate his camera so he can speak.
Thanks.
And your camera, yeah, your mic and camera, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, thank you. And thanks again, Petri, for the talk. I'm also super fascinated by all this work. And I wondered about interpersonal interaction, like a coordination. And we know like dancing is probably super powerful for social bonding or properties of social cohesion. But I'm wondering, what's your grasp on difference between frequency matching and phase locking? Because like, do you think they tap on different mechanisms? Or because, for example, we could be dancing together and we match our period of movement, but we still don't match our phases. Do you think if we match the phases, it goes in something different, or is just additional? Do you have any guess? Because in all these studies, I guess you tried sometimes between both metrics, or you think there is a difference?
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, somehow I just see that, I mean, phase locking is kind of just the end of the continuum. Kind of, it's a very accurate way of period locking.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
So
it would just be the highest level of synchrony you can achieve.
Yes. Yeah. So in that sense, it probably is not based on. They are not based on separate mechanisms, but I may be wrong.
Yeah. No, I could. Yeah. Okay. And then I thought, do you think it's accurate to call it synchrony when it's period matching compared to phase locking, or the synchrony definition applies only on phase locking? I thought about this for something. I tested myself, of course, but I don't know what's the consensus in the movement field.
I think there's great variation in the terminology. So the terminology is not so consistent. So I guess the term synchrony can refer to just period locking, but some other people use it for exact phase locking. So
yeah, okay.
So it's like yeah, the nomenclature is not very consistent.
No, okay, but thanks a lot, and looking forward to the next. And bravo anche Joshua for all the work here. So thanks.
Thank you.
So I'll ask a question if I was wondering, is it possible to connect neuroimaging with motion capture to study what's happening in the brain while engaging in music-induced movement rather than only during music listening?
Well, neuroimaging, if you include EEG in this category, then yes, in principle, actually, we are planning to do some neuroimaging studies with the EEG and movement. As far as I understand, it's challenging because there are so many artifacts because of the movement, but evidently there are some methods that are fairly efficient for removing these artifacts, but it's still an area where quite a lot of exploration and trial and error will be needed. But so EEG, yes. The other brain imaging methods, maybe not, like fMRI, hard to imagine.
Yeah, something like a mobile EEG cap, something like
yes,
that.
Yes.
Okay. I think Vittorio has another question.
Right. First, there is a written question for you from Roberto. Thank you for this really interesting presentation. Did you find a relation with music, dance, and high or low levels of lighting?
Of lighting, no, we haven't manipulated the lighting. So of course, yeah, that would be also an interesting aspect, and it's possible to do with infrared cameras because they rely on infrared, so you can still manipulate the lighting. I'm not sure if Roberto would have a hypothesis about this.
Yeah, we can ask Roberto to tell us. And yeah, please go ahead.
1 second.
Then I had another question, if I can. It deals with now virtual reality is very popular, and we tried some experiment where we were curious to understand whether a motor exercise performed in the virtual environment with respect to physical reality would be equally capable of changing some perceptual performance. I don't go into the details. It was about the expansion of peripersonal space, and it didn't. So I wonder whether, do we know anything about how much of what you learned through your experimental work do you think can be potentially transferred or modulated once migrates in a virtual reality space? Are we to expect sharper differences to emerge because of a major immersion, or the other way around? I mean, what are your thoughts about? I'm curious about to learn what do you think about it. Thank you.
So are you referring to kind of some kind of virtual reality space where the person would be dancing with some virtual avatars, or that's I guess at least with the sufficiently developed VR technology, that would be a nice way to provide fairly naturalistic immersion. Like, for instance, the participant could be made to dance with a big crowd of dancers, and while also being measured accurately, which is not maybe possible in a real
I mean, it would be a lot easier in principle if the technology, of course, first allows that to study all those contextual factors that you already showed us are so important in modulating the way the body responds. So, and as you can say, in virtual reality, you could create incredible scenarios that we're never going to be able to study in the lab with a traditional approach.
Yes. That's a very interesting approach. Indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, if there aren't any more questions, then I think we can just thank Professor Toiviainen for a really stimulating talk. Thank you very much. And for our last session, it will be on March 31st, same time, same link, and we'll be having Professor Gran to finish up this edition of the series. Thank you, everyone. Thank you again, Professor Toiviainen.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for being with us. Very interesting. Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
See you in 2 weeks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.